All right, Victorum Gaming fans and SPQR fans, we are back and we are starting a new trilogy today. This is our trilogy covering the Gaulish scenarios here, Gallic scenarios, whatever you want to call it. But basically we're going to split this up into 3 videos as we normally do, and we cover each of their special scenarios for the game here. And again, if you followed our series, we've worked our way through Athens, Britain, Caesar's legions, and Dacians most recently. Now we're going to start the Gauls. And of course, we've also covered the generic scenarios for the game too. So these are really cool and mainly more geared towards like campaign play, but certainly you could try them out on maybe a more heads-up one-on-one battles. But the first one, which we'll cover today in this video, is Druidic Circle, then Slaughter at Dawn and Harvest Time. And Gaul, the Gauls do have some access to some interesting scenarios here, so really a little bit different, quite a bit different in some cases than some of the scenarios we've been seeing so far. So as we said, this first one is called Druidic Circle. So both players, as normal, will have equal denarii. The enemy player will be the attacker and the Gallic player the defender. So as you can see from the map here, the attacker is basically getting half the board to deploy in, which is you know, pretty dang generous and good for you if you're the attacker. Then the Gauls have a pretty small board here. They're squeezed in 12 inches on each side. So, you know, assuming this looks more like, you know, a 4x4 table, so basically got 24 inches by, let's see, and 18 in there. So, overall, pretty truncated. So, not the greatest by any means. Looks like, I think maybe a 6-inch deployment, if I'm not at 24 by 6. But we'll see what's going on here. So, setup. The Gallic player places 3 druids for every 1,000 denarii in their force, or part of, to represent a druidic circle anywhere in their deployment. Well, which again is not going to be all that flexible because you still have to fit the rest of your army in there. So, but yeah, 3 druids, and then each member of the druidic circle must be placed so he's within 3 of at least 2 other members of the circle, and does not have to come from the Gallic warband. So that's always kind of interesting. And then the Gallic player then deploys the rest of his models. The attacking player then deploys all their models. The attacker gets the first phase. So just in general, it's always rough, of course, when you have to, if you're the Gaul player, you got to basically put all your cards on the table here. And, you know, you have such a small deployment zone, whereas then the attacker gets to see everything you've kind of done and basically pick their literally plan of attack here. And again, they have half the board to do it in. So terrain will definitely be a factor in this too. So ideally, there is some scenery here that prevents the attacking player from just kind of like overrunning you and boxing you in, and you'll never get a chance to maneuver. So something to keep in mind. All right, special rules. The Druidic Circle is engaged in a holy rite designed to bring doom upon their enemies. This means the Gallic player can use the Druid's Blight special rule for each of the Druids in the circle. It's permissible for an enemy hero to suffer the Blight more than once, which is pretty nasty. And we'll go back and take a look at the Blight rule from the Druids in just a second, so you guys can be refamiliarized with that. However, these Druids are non-combatants and will be automatically killed or worse, captured if any enemy model moves into contact with them. So, that being said, again, the Druids that you place here are not going to cost you points for the scenario, so just keep that in mind as opposed to like any Druids that you might actually be fielding in your list here. So you're going to have to find some way to distinguish that. But pretty nasty, though. So again, the enemy just has to make contact, and poof, those guys are gone. And then victory conditions. So victory will go to the Gallic player if he manages to completely destroy or drive off his enemy. However, if the Druid circle is completely wiped out, the attacker claims the victory. So as the Gallic player, you are going to definitely want to protect those Druids. Now, you want to be able to use their abilities, but at the same time, with such a small deployment zone, you're definitely going to want to use one of the strengths of the Gauls, which is basically filling a hell of a lot of guys, and really expand your sort of deployment area pretty rapidly. Now, it's going to suck, of course, because the attacker goes first, and you know, if they're aggressive, and again, depending on the terrain, they can certainly move pretty much right up to your deployment zone on turn 1, and theoretically even charge you. 18 inches away is certainly doable if they deployed right on the edge, and also, you know, brought things like musicians, so they get the 1 extra move per game. So you probably don't want to deploy right at the edge of your deployment zone, just to help mitigate that. And again, terrain placement would be key here, just so that you, again, don't get bum rushed basically right away. But the Gauls are definitely going to push out and also find ways to basically protect those druids behind a wall of flesh, or also have these druids, again, just have other intervening things in the way there. So the way it reads is basically those extra placed druids for the scenario aren't really able to move, it would seem. So they're not, actual, again, combatants like the regular druids from a list might be. But, they basically can't take any hit whatsoever. Interestingly, that makes them immune to missile damage. The way the scenario reads here, the only way to basically kill them is by moving into contact with them. So you're at least safe from that. You don't have to worry about them getting picked off via missile fire or anything like that. But again, that is going to be the enemy's goal. So you're going to want to put as many bodies in the way of that happening as possible. And that's going to be rough if the enemy also has a lot of troops to field and other, basically more mobility than you potentially. So you want to be very wary of that. So things like light cavalry, certain skirmishers, or even heroes that are geared towards basically getting a lot of maneuvering and stuff like that. Definitely something to pay attention to. So interesting mission, because in a certain sense it's basically like a kind of a kill 'em all mission. For the Gauls, they have to basically drive them off or kill the attacking player, but the attacker just has to kill all those druids, the special druids. So really doesn't matter what actual Gallic units they kill, but they just have to get into contact, and poof, there goes the druid. So, and if you're just playing at 1,000 points, obviously they just have to kill those 3 druids. So, that will be pretty nasty. So, unfortunately, the mission here, with the way the deployment is, it doesn't really specify, where the Gaul, those druids have to go, essentially, except that they have to be within 3 inches of each other, which really kind of puts them all nicely and neatly in the same area. But it doesn't say anything about, like keeping them a certain distance away from like a board edge or anything like that. So again, probably best to just put them as far away from the attacker's side as possible, and or wherever there's like the most amount of terrain. So this would probably be pretty cool if there was, again, like a little Druidic Circle terrain piece or something like that, just to limit some of the avenues of approach and stuff like that. But yeah, scenario doesn't specify that. But again, just some things you could probably house rule or kind of agree upon with your opponent. So the one thing we did want to do real quick is jump back and take a look at the druids here. So let's go back just a bit, and here we are. So that blight rule, so we don't get the extra druidic presence, but we get the blight rule. And the presence of a druid does not just bolster the morale of the Gauls, their enemy would also be afraid of that, essentially. So before a battle begins, the Gallic player may select any one hero in the enemy warband. That hero will suffer -1 penalty to any characteristic of the Gallic player's choosing for the rest of the battle. So keep that in mind. And then if we jump back to our scenario here, special rules. So this Gallic player can use the Druid's Blight special rule for each of the Druids in the circle. So it's permissible for an enemy hero to suffer the Blight more than once. So just keep that in mind. You could definitely at least neuter several of the enemy heroes here in certain ways. And if you're actually fielding any actual druids from your list too, that can be compounded. But just something to think about there. So, again, if they have something like a cavalry hero, you'd probably want to target that guy first, just because he's going to be on you pretty quick. But again, there's just a lot of different things to consider here. So overall, pretty fun scenario. Definitely a challenge for the Gauls. Again, it just takes people moving into contact with those druids, and poof, that's it. So it's definitely a desperate defense here, and going to be tough for the Gauls to basically drive off the attacker potentially. So Gauls are great in quantity, numbers, stuff like that, but not so much on the defense. You can definitely get like decently armored infantry and stuff like that if you play all the upgrades, but again, that reduces your quantity. So this definitely puts the Gauls into doing something that they're not necessarily the strongest at, and would make for an interesting game. So let us know your thoughts on the scenario here, if you've tried it and your experience with it. Hope you guys enjoyed our little run through here. So again, this is the Druidic Circle, the first of the Gaul missions for SPQR. If you could, drop us a like and a subscribe if you haven't already, and then stay tuned for the next mission.